So we're moving into 12.4, I believe. This is going to be complex numbers and imaginary numbers. So this, you may have been exposed to this, maybe not. But question one says express in terms of I. So we have the square root of negative 4. The square root of negative 4. So one of the things we've talked about already is in math, real numbers, when we talk about real numbers, they're either going to be rational or irrational. So we talked about, integers, fractions, and decimals. Those are what we call rational. And if the radical was left in the problem, we describe those as irrational. Now, something else we get into is this. A number that isn't real is described as an imaginary number. Imaginary numbers are used in higher level concepts, but some of the thinking connected to imaginary numbers is associated in electricity concepts. So anyway, imaginary numbers is kind of a unique thing. But like I said, some of the actual concepts tied to imaginary numbers are also tied with some of the electrical concepts that you may see. So one of the things we pick up on is this. An imaginary number cannot be added to a real number. So a plus bi is the form if both are present. So a represents a real number and bi represents the imaginary component. So the imaginary unit I, it's going to identify that an imaginary number is present. So this is where we're getting into what we call complex numbers. Complex numbers is when we're getting into involving not only real numbers, but imaginary numbers. So complex numbers are real and imaginary. But keep in mind, you cannot combine a real number with an imaginary number. That it would be considered simplified. So how do we come up with an imaginary number? So if we look at this problem right here, the square root of negative 4, well, remember, if I just give you the square root of 4, what this is asking is, what can you square and get 4? Well, 2 squared would give me 4, so therefore the square root of 4 is 2. So the square root of negative 4 is, what can you square and get a negative 4? That's what that's asking. Well, there is no real number that does that. You can't square a real number and get a negative 4 because we know that if you square any number, it's always a positive number. You cannot square a number and get a negative number because we know that a negative times a negative is also a positive. So there is no real number for this. So what happens is we can rewrite this problem as 4 times negative 1 because 4 times negative 1 is the same thing as negative 4. And what we do in math is we create this I squared to represent a negative 1. So this problem turns into 4i squared. So notice how there's 2 2's and there are 2 i's. So that means that you can bring out a 2 and an I, and since there's nothing left inside the radical, that turns into 2i. So what this boils down to then is this. If there is a negative inside a square root radical, that means it represents an imaginary number. So all you really have to do is take the square root of 4 and stick on the I and say that's 2i. So that's going to represent an imaginary number. Now, on your calculator, see if we can make this happen on a calculator as well. On your calculator, you do have a mode on your calculator right up here, mode. And one of the things right now, notice how we're down here kind of close to the middle, it says real. Right now, my calculator is in real mode. So if I quit that, so quit is right above mode. So second mode, you'll get out of that. So right now, if I take the square root of negative 4, I hit enter, it's going to say you're in real mode. Calculations must result in a real number. So what they're saying is this calculation does not represent a real number. But what I can do on this calculator is I can go to the mode. Gotta quit that first. So I can make this quit. So if I hit mode, notice that if I go down here and highlight real, notice I have my little directional pad. If I slide over to this A plus BI, you recognize that? We just kind of may know that over here. What I can do is change my calculator to what's called the complex mode. So it'll now do what we call complex numbers if I change that. So now if I go back over here and quit this, if I now type in the square root of -4 again, notice how it'll actually give me 2i, because 2i is a number. It's just called an imaginary number. So this I is not a variable. It's called the imaginary unit, and 2i represents an actual number. So keep that in mind, that imaginary numbers are numbers.